Good afternoon, everybody. Richard Silver here from Alchemist, going to present to you our webinar on digitalisation of processes, in particular at the barriers and how to overcome them, and with a specific reference to the way that Alchemist put together health and safety solutions. I'm just going to, the numbers of attendees keep clicking up, so I'm just going to wait one more minute until it stabilises, and then we've got as many people on as we can. But while we're waiting, please, if you have any questions throughout the session, there's a little chat panel on your GoToWebinar dashboard. By all means, just type them in, and my colleague Neil Hartley will then be able to relay them to me when we come to the end of the process. Okay, we seem to have stabilized now, so we'll actually get started. So again, welcome to our webinar on digitalization of processes. There are three terms. There's digitize, digitalize, or digital transformation. And these terms are often confused, they're interchanged. They actually mean different things, and they have different levels of benefit to an organization. So let's just take a quick pause and have a look at what we actually mean by these three phrases. Digitize is really just simply converting from analog to digital. So a Word document is a prime example of that sort of thing. So something in the health and safety space or the contractor management space, such as a creation of risk assessments and method statements, uses a document template electronically, and you type them onto the template rather than writing them out by hand. Now, there are some significant advantages to this. It's definitely faster. It's definitely more legible. It's you don't get the old doctor's handwriting scenario with these sort of things. And because you can use pull-down menus in fields, you can actually make things more consistent so that everybody tends to call things the same term and the same name. There are, however, some disadvantages. The key disadvantage is it actually doesn't change your process. If your process is totally reliant on human beings, once you've typed this up or you've got it electronically, it still needs to be sent to the relevant person. It'll be sent by email in exactly the same way a paper document might be scanned and emailed to you. You have to know that you've got to monitor your email addresses. There's no warnings that such and such has turned up. You then have to approve them. You've got to then make sure that the contractor knows they've been approved. So there's lots of areas of problem in a predominantly human process, which is managed as it is totally by human beings. It is low cost, but there's minimal additional benefit above and beyond the fact that you now have a consistent typed piece of paper rather than a handwritten piece of paper. So digitalization, that's taking it one step further. That's actually taking digitized data and linking it with other technologies to manage a process. For example, converting a paper permit to work process to a fully digital electronic permit to work process. There are obviously advantages here. It's going to be faster, it's easier to use, it's consistent, and you can actually map process workflows. So electronic systems can be configured to follow exactly the same process workflow that you ideally would like to follow with a paper process, but obviously without the risk of things getting lost in the process. So an electronic process will ensure that each step is completed correctly before you're allowed to move to the next step, which is one of the big advantages of these types of systems. There are disadvantages. They're often not disadvantages with the actual system itself, but often it'll identify that where you strengthen one process, it can actually show problems with another one, what we used to call the balloon effect. You squeeze a balloon in one place and it will actually then inflate itself further down the process. And as I say here, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So there's sometimes a disadvantage of putting in a digitalized solution is it just flags up where you've got problems elsewhere in your overall process. You then have to address that. The things are mid-range costs, and they bring what we call local or departmental benefits. So one department would benefit from this, but it might then have a knock-on effect on other departments, as I said earlier, highlighting any weaknesses that may appear in there. But there are definite benefits in terms of time saving, consistency of process, and ultimately compliance. Digital transformation, however, takes you to that far end of the spectrum. Digital transformation means using not just digitized but also digitalized systems to get an enterprise-wide solution to an overall problem, covering all the different departmental elements that I mentioned in the last slide. So the advantages are you get local consistency, you get control and compliance, but you have an enterprise-wide visibility and control through cross-application data mining and reporting, a horrendous term, but it does mean that you can actually report across all sorts of different data sources that you have within there, and by mining that data, you can start to actually identify any trends or tendencies within things that are happening. We always have something that goes wrong on a Thursday. What is it about Thursdays within the business? Is it to do with the contractors? Is it to do with the people? Is it to do with the environment? Is it to do with the process? You can start to pick up and do those sort of activities at an enterprise level by having all the data from all of your digitalized systems in one place. Disadvantages, as I've sort of just put here, is what we call the Pringle effect. Once you pop, you can't stop. So as you add one element, it'll, as we said earlier, you squeeze the balloon, it'll open it up somewhere else. You then need to address the next one and your next one, and you start moving and gradually building your whole solution together. So it's a benefit as much as a disadvantage, but it does mean you have to have an overall picture of where you want to be before you actually start addressing them, and think about how you address them in the right sequence. Obviously, these things can be high cost, but an advantage is you can actually build these things in stages, bringing on the critical processes first, and then adding enterprise-wide benefits as you start to build the overall solution. So let's identify the differences between digitize, digitalize, and digital transformation. So what are the barriers to success? There are always going to be barriers, and they will range from being human barriers, financial barriers, a whole range. We're going to address them, each of them separately, but you must understand exactly what they are and how you're going to fix them if you're going to get to the level of success that you want. The first one we're going to look at is the failure to engage, and you don't need to just engage your employees, you also need to think about engaging your contractors and anybody else involved in the process. Now, the biggest problem to any adoption of any system, electronic or whatever, it's always management of change. To some people, just the thought of change is scary. It's something they will fight against as hard as they can. And from our own experiences in implementing different types of solution, this is why we're looking at these particular barriers. We've encountered them before, and we've worked with customers to help them overcome them, so we can understand exactly what they're going through in order to make sure that our solution, when it goes in, is successful. So if you're adopting a solution, you really got to engage everyone that it will impact. Spending money, throwing a solution over the wall at someone and just hoping that it'll all work out just won't happen. You've got to be transparent and consistent in your communications to everybody about this, and actually involve them in that process. Get them to understand exactly what it's going to mean for them, and not just what it means for them in terms of the change of the role that they're going to have to develop, but also the benefits that that will bring to each individual within the organization. Key thing is pick a solution that solves a problem. And the only way you can do that is to talk to people that have got the problem, get them to understand what it is you're trying to do to help them solve that problem, and they'll actually buy into a solution more easily. And as I said earlier, it might not just be your employees, it could be contractors. Now, all this makes a lot of sense, but the number of times we've been into projects where when we go to a kickoff meeting, we sit there with some of the members of the team that might be, for example, in the permit side of it, at the permit generation or the permit authorization stage, and it's the first they've even heard about it. The system's been bought, it's been thrown over the wall, and they've now got to pick it up and run with it. So firstly, they feel aggrieved that they've had this landed on their lap. It almost looks like senior management don't believe they're doing a good job, which is why they've been given the system to use to improve their performance. And all the negatives are in their minds in that process. Is it here to replace me? What's the system going to do? How complicated is it going to be? How much training am I going to have to do? What was wrong with what I was doing before? And it's a negative way to start. So engagement is critical in the process. The organizational structure is another key part. You shouldn't try and put a square peg in a round hole. Understand that the organization structure, whatever you put a solution in, it will change, but it's going to change for the better once it's in place. You need to think about retraining and reskilling where necessary, getting people to understand that by going through those retraining and reskilling processes, they're providing an absolutely essential role within the business. And as I said earlier, plan and communicate. Don't just do it and hope. Poor quality data is also a key part. There's the old adage about computer software and computer programs. You put rubbish in, you will just get rubbish out. So data is the foundation of any solution you might want to put in. You've got to spend some time cleaning it, making sure it's accurate and representative. For example, I go way back with the e-permit solution when we were with Banyard Solutions. We go back to the really early days when this product was on the market in sort of the mid-2000s. We would actually have people wanting to put asset data into the system so they could permit at asset level if they wanted to. We would go to meetings and we would sit at the meetings and we would probably spend 3/4 of the time listening to the client, actually having arguments between departments as to what asset actually existed where within the business. Their asset management system said it was here. The engineers said, no, it's not here. We've actually done something else with that. It's been changed. It's not even operating now. So making sure the data is clean and accurate is important. Now, we solved that problem because we don't actually require going down to asset level for permit systems anymore. When you permit, you're permitting really to a place of work, an area or an individual piece of equipment, not an actual asset or a pump within an air conditioning system. If you're going to replace the pump on the air conditioning system, you're taking the whole system out of operation. So by changing the way we looked at how we manage data, it helped customers ensure that they could get to the level of cleansed data to make the system work. So that was both us and the customer working together to understand what it was that they actually wanted to achieve, and us understanding how we could actually go through it and achieve it with them. Sometimes you need to use third-party services as a prime example in that, in the Alchemist world for our health and safety solution. If you're going to reduce permits to work, it's often useful to make sure that you've got something like Safe Contractor in place, because it enables you to make sure you select the right contractor before you digitalise your permit to work process. If you give a really good, accurate, digitalised permit to work to a bad contractor, you actually don't achieve anything. So all these elements will actually start to link together, and you'll see later on how they all do integrate together. And that will help you get to the point where you've got the right people doing the right job at the right place at the right time, completely safely. The next one's lack of skills and talent. There was a survey just a couple of years ago, or a year or so ago, from Ernst & Young and Oxford Economics that actually polled a number of leaders talking about digital programs, and 79% of them actually highlighted that programs just stall in the early phases due to the lack of skills, talents, and budgets. This is similar to the putting the square peg in the round hole analogy we had earlier on. If you've haven't got the right skills for the people, it doesn't matter how good the solution is, if they can't use it, it will fail. And skills and leadership apply to, skills and talent applies to leadership as well as the employees. And it's not just once only. Your business changes continuously and training's got to change to match. If we use that analogy earlier on, where you start to build, put one system in, it solves a problem, you squeeze the balloon, it's moved it to somewhere else. When you start to put something in that fixes that something else, you've also got to make sure that everybody's trained and understands now how the two systems work together and work in harmony. The next one is the failure to assess and mitigate risk. I've always used the 7 Ps, and I refer to those of the British Army, not the ones that are used in the marketing environment. So if you plan properly and you prepare, it'll stop bad performance, not wanting to use those words on screen. Always remember to apply that to a project. Assess where your project could go wrong, assess the likelihood of it going wrong, and assess the reasons why it could go wrong. And only once you've done that can you actually work out what you've got to do to make sure it doesn't go wrong. It sounds obvious, but it's just surprising how many organizations don't consider this factor. Again, we've been involved in projects where we're implementing a solution, and I'm just not referring to Alchemist or Banyard Solutions here, but all through my 20-30 year career of installing software solutions, the number of times things go wrong because they hadn't assessed the project itself. Nothing wrong with the solution, nothing wrong with the software, but it fails when it goes into the environment. So there's a lot of pressure on an organization to make sure these things are done prior to actually putting the things in. And then you've got to make sure you're measuring success. The only way to know if you're successful is to address where you are and where you want it to be. So what does success look like to you? Given where you are, what will you need to do to get to that level of achievement? And define it in small steps. Don't just say we're going to go from A to Z. Go from A to B, then B to C, C to D, and so forth. And don't do what I call a Christopher Columbus. When he left, he didn't know where he was going. When he got there, he didn't know where he was. When he got back, he didn't know where he'd been. And he actually did it 7 times in his lifetime. So always keep those sort of things in mind. If you're going to implement a software solution to solve a problem, identify what it is that means success. And that doesn't mean that the software, when you press this button, this comes out at the back end. But how is this, when it's been put in as part of your business process, how has this given you a success to your business? And then the final one is what I call biting off more than you can chew. If we're looking at that overall project of something, for example, putting in that Alchemist suite, that enterprise management suite for health and safety, don't try and do it in one step. Identify all of the elements that make up your overall objective, and you could find that there are multiple things in there. And I use that example again, that when you're looking at doing a permit to work solution, key ingredients to permits to work are risk assessments and method statements. Risk assessments and method statements, depending on your industry, may need input about cost assessments. So we have a product called SciPol that can help put together the right risk assessments and method statements that will then become part of a permit process. Safe Contractor will help you select the right contractor for the job, so that when you have your permit to work with your associated RAMs and cost assessments, everything is as safe as possible. So see what elements you require for the solution that you want, and then organize them into a sequence that gives you a combination of quick wins and impact on the business. Don't try and put the walls on before you've dug the foundation. So don't try and put in one element if it depends on others, but think about it carefully and plan them. So achieving digital transformation, we're just going to use this obviously from the Alchemist Enterprise Health and Safety Solution as the example, but we have things that help digitize. So you can use apps from Info Exchange to provide digitized forms, audits, inspections, accident incident reporting, and so forth. So taking it off paper, putting it into an electronic format. We've got the supporting service solutions that we mentioned earlier, such as SciPol for cost assessments and Safe Contractor, which is an accreditation service to ensure that the contractors that you use meet common standards and therefore can provide the services that you want. We've got digitalized solutions such as e-permits for the permit to work management, And then the overall digital transformation, i.e. using our platform Information Exchange as the data platform into which all of these digitized and digitalized solutions are plugged in to provide an overall integrated solution. And that solution looks like this. So here you can see, if you're imagining this is about doing works, so you have Safe Contractor to manage the people. E-permits will manage the buildings and understand exactly where permits are going to be offered. SciPol is an ingredient into risk assessments. Risk assessments feed into permits. When a job's underway, you're going to be doing audits and inspections. You'll identify any accidents and incidents that happen. That will feed into corrective actions, preventive actions that you might need to take. And that again will feed back into any changes in the risk assessment and the risk management that's required. So this overall integrated platform will provide all of those elements of that solution. But as we said earlier, you can't just say, yeah, I'll have one of those, and you have everything within that element. You have to start building it up slowly so that you end up with a solution that exactly meets your needs with the minimum of change management within your organization. So for example, in the digitized processes here, we're looking at these: info exchange, audits and inspections, risk assessment templates, so that everybody will produce risk assessments in the same format, so that when you're reviewing them, they are all complete and they are all in a consistent format. Information exchange, again, to do any corrective action and preventative action analysis. This means doing analysis on things such as accidents and incidents and any audits and inspections, and coming back to you with management information that allows you to make decisions as to what changes you will need to make elsewhere in the business. And all of these are presented in the Info Exchange platform, where you can actually select and look at all of these different elements that are there. I've just highlighted a couple here. So inspections, risk assessments, audits. You can also manage things like training. You can manage the structure, so what a site looks like, who's actually employed on those sites, and you can do a whole range of different activities that all link together to provide this. But these are, in essence, the digitized applications. In reality, none of these are actually just digitized applications, because once you've created the audits, Information Exchange allows you the platform to do analysis on all of those audits, look for any common factors, do that sort of data mining capability, and obviously then reporting it at a later date. When we're looking here, this is an example of, for example, an audit. So you can set up the number of questions that you want. You go through those questions when you're on site. You fill in any information that you want in there, and it will then grade them as to whether they are compliant, non-compliant, whether they, for example, meet best practice. So it's totally configurable to come up with the solution that you actually require, and then comes up with an audit rating at the end and a status. And these can all be scheduled. So you may have a rule that says, oh, I want to run a random contractor audit once a week. So it will flag up to a person that's supposed to do the audits, need to go and do an audit. They can look at the jobs on site, decide which contractor they're going to go and audit, and they can go and audit them and check them. And the same will apply to things like inspections. If you have to inspect certain areas of the plant or the factory, you can go through those, you can schedule them, and it will flag up when things need to be done, when they need to be updated, and so forth. So it'll help manage that process, even though it is just a digitized application. It'll help manage the workflow and therefore, in a sense, become a digitalized application. When we're looking at supporting services, as we mentioned earlier on, we've got things like SciPol, which is a cost assessment that plugs into risk assessments. If I'm doing, for example, some particular cleaning work, or I'm going to be putting down carpet tiles in a confined space, the chemical that I'm using in the adhesive will probably need an attached cost assessment, so that when the RAMs are reviewed, you can actually see the chemical that's using, what requirements I need in terms of PPE, any precautions I need to take place, such as only be in there for no more than 2 hours at a time, etc. And obviously, we have Safe Contractor, which is a key part, an accreditation service. So it accredits all contractors to a consistent level. It doesn't just check whether they're capable of doing the job and whether their insurances are in place, But it'll look at things like, are they 18,001 compliant? Do they have an equalities policy? What's their status with regard to insurances? A whole range of different elements that are all used to put contractors together into one capability, into one configuration. So you're comparing apples with apples all the time. As I say, contractor user, you could then just ask the system, I need a person that's going to come in and do this type of work within 20 miles of my site, and it will come up with them. It'll come up with options that you can choose. You can review their performances. It'll hold information about them in terms of their past performances. If you've thrown up any non-compliances, they can all be logged. And you can then start ranking your contractors, and it'll also flag them up automatically as, for example, at risk if their insurances are due to expire within the next couple of months. So it can all be part of a sort of corporate social responsibility environment, as well as picking the right person for the right job. When we're looking at digitalized solutions, here, for example, you've got the e-permit solution. So e-permits, as everybody's probably aware, is a system that will actually pick up the whole process of managing permits from a requesting stage right the way through to the execution of the job and the closing of the job. And digitalized solutions are about automating a process. So just as an example here, you can request permits, or contractors can request permits themselves. When they request a permit through the e-permit system, it'll actually run a number of compliance checks. So if you are going to be managing a permit yourself for a customer, for a contractor, what you're supposed to do is make sure that when that permit request comes in, that the RAMs are applicable to the job, that everybody named on that permit is properly trained, qualified, and inducted. The contractors' insurances are all up to date and in place. Any security checks that they need are all done on each employee that's turning up, and that the PPE is properly checked off beforehand. Time pressures mean sometimes that doesn't happen. Complacency pressures mean sometimes it's the same guy you've seen every week for the last 5 years. Yep, come in, there's your permit, off you go. You can go and do whatever activity is, from welding to high voltage work or whatever. What you might not be aware of, that guy that you know and know so well, his training expired last week. So the system will maintain those. So when a contractor even makes a request, all of these things are done before you even see it. So therefore, once that has passed, that permit request is then routed to the right people in an organization. Exactly the same as if a handmade piece of paper would be passed around to someone that might approve access on site, someone in health and safety for a confined space permit, and it might need 1 or 2 people to approve high-risk activities such as, for example, hot works. Internally, you might decide that actually what we need in isolation to do this hot works, we've got to have to isolate the fire system, the isolation system. So therefore, you can generate an internal permit request. That means your own internal staff are going to do it. So that request that came from the contractor results in 4 permits: an access permit, a confined space permit, hot works permit, and an isolation permit. But the benefit of all digitalizing the process is that only the right people get to review the information that they are required to review. And at the end of the process, everything is finally only approved if everybody has approved it. And once everybody has approved it, that information can then go back to the contractor to say, yes, you can turn up on site. So this is a simple example of how a digitalized solution can give you management of a process that can have gaps in it because you're using paper. Paper can get lost, people can misinterpret, people can not read training records, not check them, not check if RAMs are still valid or if they've expired, and so forth. So that's the benefit of a digitalized solution. And then finally, you've got the digital transformation solution. This is where we plug everything together into a single data platform that can then assess the information from permits, accidents and incidents, audits and inspections, Why have we had these accidents and incidents? Are they tied to a specific area of the building? Are they tied to specific contractors, or are they tied to specific permits and activity and type of work? You can't get that same bit of information out of individual solutions, because we're trying to combine here permits with people, with buildings and structures and so forth. What can be done in the information exchange environment is start to pull all of these things together. So you can get management information, graphical information about what's actually happening in your business, where the risks are, where incidents, for example, are happening, what type of incident is actually happening on site, and your frequency rates. So all the relevant key bits of information, but pulled from multiple solutions. So that's the type of sort of end goal. Just going back to that previous slide, this is the sort of end goal where we are putting ourselves as a supplier of health and safety solutions. But the benefit to our end customers is you don't have to just, I'll have one of those, please. You can actually build it up in elements and achieve the level of compliance that you want by adding them together as you go through the process. So it can be a long change. A long change is better because it also means you can bring people on board easier, and they will be on the journey with you and adopting the solution as you go. So this is where we think we differentiate ourselves from many people out in the marketplace, in that we enable key, what you might call best of breed solutions, to actually be part of an overall solution. They're all part of Alchemist, but they can work standalone just as well as they can work in a fully integrated environment. So hopefully that's what's covered off the topic of today, where we're looking at, as I said, the digitalisation of processes, but just sort of taking it a bit further than just, you know, what are the barriers to taking on these processes, and showing how organisations like Alchemist approach them, and we try and solve those problems in a way that means it's easier for you to adopt and overcome the barriers, but also end up with an overall solution of benefit to you. So Neil, are there any questions that have come up in the process?
Yes, we do have a few, Richard. Just taking them in order. So firstly, how does ePermits manage building data from an implementation standpoint?
Oh, okay. One of the key things that the permit system wants to do is identify what we call clashes. So you don't want to have two jobs taking place in the same place at the same time if, for example, one needs the power on and one needs it off, because there's a risk that, well, it's an obvious risk in that one of the jobs can't get done. But you also don't want high risk activities taking place in the same place at the same time. Neither contractor know it's going on, and therefore you could have an incident or an accident that has serious implications for the business. So the way we overcome that in the permit system is that ePermits has in its head, if you like, a map of a building. So if we take an office building will have a number of floors. So however many floors you've got, we configure them within the system. So you've got 7 floors, a basement, a roof, and an external area for car parks and so forth. Now within an office, we also know that there are what we call certain location types. You're going to have plant rooms, you're going to have lift shafts, you're going to have fire lift shafts, you're going to have passenger lift shafts, you're going to have receptions, atriums, a whole range of different types of location. And we built up standard data sets. So when you get the solution, if you want an office, you will get the standard data sets for office, which covers, as I say, the location types and all the different types of services that you get, HVAC, electrical, fire systems, and so forth, already configured within the system. All you need to do is map them to the location that they exist. So I need to know that my plant room, my HVAC is in the electrical plant room, which is in the basement. And that gets mapped in the process of configuration by simply putting X's in boxes in spreadsheets that says, I've got my HVAC electrical gear is in a location type called plant room, and plant rooms are in the basement of this office building. And obviously this standard data set, it's going to be a 90% fit to whatever you have. so you can configure it. So when we go through the implementation process, we look at the standard data set and you say, yeah, well, we don't have an atrium, but we do have a test facility. So we take atrium out and we add test facility. And then we'll say to you, where is your test facility? Oh, it's in the roof. Okay, so you put an X in the box that says this new thing called test facility is in the roof. And that then configures your system. So when permit requests come in to be working on the HVAC gear, the system knows, well, that exists in the basement. So if any other permit request is in the basement for someone that's doing painting and decorating or any other high risk activity, it'll flag up to say, well, guys, you've got a problem here. What do you want to do? The system won't make decisions for you, but it will flag it up and say, what do you want to do? Do you want the two jobs to take place at the same time because it's safe anyway? Do you want to put an additional precaution in place to make sure it's safe for those two jobs to take place? Or do you need to bounce one of the jobs? So that's a sort of a bit of a long-winded explanation, but it's understanding why we need to configure the buildings, because there are real reasons from a health and safety perspective why we want the buildings configured to a degree that allows you to assess risk if you've got multiple jobs taking place at the same time.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Next question is, should we be involving contractors in the permit to work implementation process?
That is entirely up to you. We've got lots of clients out there, again, that use the permit system that will create permit requests themselves. So a lot of our clients are people like the big FM companies, CBRE, ISS, Mace Macro, Mighty, JLL. They often will get some of their contractors to create the permit requests themselves. So the contractors know e-permits, they use it on a number of different sites. They will create their permits for things such as PPM work. So I'm going to come in every month and I'm going to service your air conditioning units. I will create those permits, submit them for you to approval, and then I'll just clone them and create them again next month and send them off to you again. So contractors can do that. But we also have customers that say, no, actually, we retain control of this. What we do in our current process is we ring the contractor up and we say, okay, this is the job we want you to do. When can you do it and who are you going to send? They'll tell us that on the phone and we currently write it on the permit and then we go through the approval process and then documents waiting for them. You can replicate that in the e-permit system as well. So you can fill in the electronic form in the e-permit system while you're on the phone to the contractor if you want, and fill in that information. And then once you've filled it all in and you effectively submit it for approval, it does all of those competency checks and it'll say, well, no, hang on, that contractor has named this guy Fred and he hasn't got training in confined space. So that permit's not going to be compliant. So you'd have to get back on the phone to the contractor and say, look, Fred hasn't trained in confined space. We need to have a team on the job that is properly trained and qualified to do the work. And that's how that will work within the system.
Okay, and last one for now, Richard. How should we measure success of a permit to work implementation?
How do you measure? Everything seems to be geared around permits to work today, which is good because that is my own domain of expertise. How do you measure the success? I think the key is you can't measure it in terms of have we reduced our number of accidents and incidents because there's not really a linear attachment to that. One of the biggest objections we often get is that, well, we haven't had an incident for 10 years. So why do I need to spend 10,000, 20,000, whatever it is on a system, which isn't actually going to do anything for my business? You know, we're a safe business. It's obviously the biggest issue that we come across. I think the biggest way that you can actually test whether or not it's been successful is how often you flag up things that could have been a risk that you might have missed before. So how often does your system throw up that the contractor's not properly trained or that they need their induction updated or the risk assessments are out of date? How much interaction do you have to have with the system that flags up there are weaknesses in your supply chain? That will then flag up. This is the squeezing the balloon. So you squeeze the balloon in the permit process and you've tied it down. And it's now just popped up again a bit further down in the contractor management process. So that's where you could then think, well, if we add Safe Contractor into that mix, Safe Contractor is going to start managing all of those issues about the contractor themselves. So once we pick the contractor, we know that it's all going to be kept up to date within the permit system. And then in information exchange, there was another module on there which talked about the training elements. Training elements are obviously held within the permit system, and we have that standalone. But if you do monitor the training elements within the environment of information exchange, you can actually use that to start throwing up triggers that will actually inform your contractor. Joe's confined space training is going to expire in 3 weeks' time. You're going to need to make sure he's updated. So it becomes a completely interactive solution to make that work. So that's the best way I can say of in terms of assessing the success. It's not in the reduction of incidents and accidents, because that may not be an applicable thing in this process. If you're buying one to cut down the number of accidents you've got a bigger problem than just a permit to work system. I think one of the biggest accolades that we ever had for the permit system was a guy called Paul Hood, who was I think the chief engineer or something for Barclays, for ISS. When he was asked, what is it that you like about the permit system? His comment was, when I drive home in the evening, I don't actually have to worry about any work that's taking place that night or the next day, because the system's taken all of that worry out of it for me. It's managed RAPs, training competency, inductions. I've just got to worry about the job when the contractor's on site. I haven't got to worry about anything prior.
Cool. Thank you, Richard.
Any other questions at all? Anything on the wider scale of the Alchemist solution?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay. Well, and everybody will obviously get access to the recording of this. So, I mean, by all means, you can circulate it elsewhere within your businesses. And if you have any questions, my details are on the screen. By all means, drop me an email, whether it's to do with the permit system or any of the other Alchemist solutions that you saw on the screen earlier today. So thank you very much indeed, everybody. We're going to turn off the recording now and look forward to maybe catching up with some of you soon. Thank you.